Good evening, all of you. Welcome to this masterclass brought to you by Founding Fuel. I'm Swaminathan. I go by Swami and I will be the moderator for the session today. Shaping startup culture is today's topic for discussion. And going by the overwhelming request we have received from all of you to attend this masterclass, we believe it is indeed of great interest to all of you. So thank you very much for joining us live today. Now, a quick background on why we chose this topic. Over the last decade, India has witnessed an explosion in the number of startups. And these are typically companies founded by first generation entrepreneurs. And as consumers, we have experienced a new level of convenience and personalization from some of them. However, for every few startups that do it well, the majority don't get a lot of it right. So that made us ask a question. How do startups that do well do it right? There are, of course, a few important things they do differently, like looking at customer needs through a new lens or using leapfrogging technologies and so on. But when we speak to entrepreneurs, they usually point to a greater power, that of the culture for their success. That's the trigger for our conversation today. I hope you find it engaging. First, I want to make a quick announcement. We are designing an immersion at Big Basket to deepen our understanding of how a modern online grocer thinks and works. We'll share details at the end of this masterclass, so please hang in there. We hope to cover good ground with our seller panel today, but because of the vastness of the subject, we may run out of time to explore all the questions we may get. In case that happens, we will try and get the panelists to answer some of them on our Slack group, which some of you have already joined even before this masterclass. Now, a quick introduction to the panelists. I've been aware of Big Basket even before it entered the public realm. I heard about it early because I used to work in a venture with common investors. The founding members, I understood, were a seasoned team, having been the handful who had survived the first internet wave in the country. And years later, when a book on Big Basket, Saying No to Jigad, popped on my Amazon recommendation, I was obviously interested. By then, I'd already experienced Big Basket as a customer and was hooked on the reliable service. The book was written by Hari and Subramaniam, Mani as he's called. I love the title to start off, Hari and Mani. When I read the book, I realized that the team had done a lot to transmit the vision of the entrepreneurs into reality, and much of it dwells on the realm of culture. So I got in touch with Hari, and interacting with Hari over the last 4 weeks has been a pleasure. His responses have been lightning fast, and he was open to many of the suggestions we proposed, including the immersion session. And you must have read Hari's columns and writings. He gives back actively to the community. Welcome, Hari, to this masterclass.
Thank you, Swami. It's a pleasure.
Hi. I recently discovered that Mani and I were colleagues for a brief while we were at PwC. So I'm really happy to have a fellow colleague on the panel here. Welcome, Mani.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the panel.
Okay, when we were thinking about this topic, we wanted to make the masterclass more contextual, and we needed a strong mind to relate the experiences of Big Basket to the Indian and international startup scene. So the search was very focused, and the name came up really fast. It was Sandeep Murthy of Lightbox Ventures. I'd met Sandeep a few years back when he introduced us to the startups Lightbox had invested in. He is very perceptive, and being a voracious reader with hands-on experiences, perspectives are very insightful and practical. Welcome, Sandeep, to this masterclass.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to it.
Okay, we will tackle today's conversation in 3 segments. In the first segment, we will explore why does culture matter? And in the second, we will deal with how to build a culture roadmap, talking on topics of emergent versus deliberate culture. And in the third, we will explore the toolkit for shaping culture. So there's a lot on our plate, so let's get started. I'll start with Hari. Hari, it's often said that it's difficult to define culture, but easy to experience it. You came to Big Basket a few years after it was founded. Could you just walk us through what was the brief from the founders and how did you interpret it?
So there was no particular brief, I would say, Swami. So this was, goes back to a conversation that Hari Menon, Sudhakar and I had at the Hyderabad airport. We had a waiting time for about 2 hours to catch a flight to Mumbai. So we caught up on this topic of culture. And I figured out that the Big Basket founders had handled culture very intuitively. and they had not really cared a lot to put a structure or define some of the key aspects of culture. That's okay, because I think doing something like culture intuitively and doing it well is far better than putting things on paper and not doing a great job of it. So I think some of the things that we discussed were that if we decide to articulate, what Big Basket stands for in terms of culture, should it really reflect who we are, or should it have some aspirational component as well? And then we figured out that it's good to, have it largely define who we are, and to some extent bring in an aspirational component. So we figured out that Big Basket is really maniacal when it comes to focus on customers. So that should reflect and get identified as one component of our culture. We also realized that, we want people to take ownership, even if everything is not in your control. And everything is never in your control. So we brought that up as a second component of culture. The third component was, freedom, but personal responsibility in everything that you do. Because as you scale, you cannot rely on policies to figure out everything. You can't rely on audits to get people to do the right thing. And therefore we said, you will have the freedom to do the things, but then you're personally accountable. And then we said that Big Basket is not particularly known for speed and agility, and we realized that going forward that is an important component. So we brought that in as an aspirational component. So I would say that culture is like Adam Smith's invisible hand. Adam Smith talked of the invisible hand in The Wealth of Nations. In a free market, you don't really know what drives customers, what drives the suppliers to do the right things. It is the incentive of price, the demand-supply dynamics, the freedom to produce, the freedom to consume, which ultimately decides, which leads the market to do all the right kind of things. And in an organizational context, I would say culture is what leads people to do the right kind of things. It's the invisible component. It's the tacit stuff which really matters in a culture. So even though we did lay out these 4 components of culture, we realized that, they would just remain on paper unless you tried and lived each of these every day. Because unless you live each of these every day, nothing gets really done. So that's the way we went about it. So we built everything into the reviews. A lot of it was already being done. For example, it was very, very clear that customer was the centerpiece in everything that we did. In fact, the first question that we asked is, why does a customer shop with Big Basket? And we answered that very thoughtfully. And because we answered that thoughtfully, we did all the right kind of things. And that applied to everything else as well. So broadly, I would say there was no particular brief as such. They were doing all the things, right things intuitively. But I think it made sense to bring in some degree of structure and some degree of education with all the stakeholders, which is, people who are dispersed in the regions, the different leaders in all the regions. I think it's important for them to understand what the company stands for, what are the right things to do. Sure. And I think we went about doing that communication as well.
Okay, fantastic. Excellent. I just want to move to Sandeep. Sandeep, we just heard Hari talk about the fact that it's an invisible hand. Now, in the hurly-burly of building a business, how often do founders see building culture as something important? We did hear Big Basket was doing it sort of intuitively, but is that something even some of the founders consider as part of building a business?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Harry mentioned that it was intuitive versus planned. And I think that in general, when we come across founders and companies at the stage we invest, because we invest very early, I think they're primarily focused on survival. And when you start with that survival mindset, you start to think that the only things that matter are, let me get my product out, let me ensure that, my customers or revenue is coming in. I don't know that you put as much attention on the finer elements of what your culture is going to be. I think at the start, especially, it's quite easy. It's you, maybe it's your co-founder, maybe you hire a few people. It's all under control. People touch and feel each other. They have a good sense of what's happening. And I think that the minute you raise some money, or the minute your business scales to a certain level, you now suddenly have to codify to an extent the things that you've intrinsically known. And I think that process is often overlooked, because you get these investors who come in and say, grow your business. I've invested behind this plan. You got to do this, you got to do that. And it's the rare investor or situation that allows for the opportunity to say, hang on a second, how are we thinking about how this is going to last for the long run? And I love the title of the book that these guys wrote, because we've often talked about the fact that India has survived in a Jugaad mindset for everything. And put four wheels in a box and you have a car. I think in the same mindset has probably extended to many areas, including perhaps how we think about how the culture and environment should evolve. So, I think you're absolutely right. The hurly-burly chaos of the start doesn't allow for it, and it doesn't prioritize it. And I think, quite honestly, as investors, we're culprits for it as well. We're not prioritizing it enough. And I think that long-run mindset, in the long run, the mindset has to change to ensure a long-run viability of a business and health of it.
Sure. Excellent. So Sandeep, I just had a follow-on question for you. Since you worked in the Silicon Valley, we've heard the imprint of Intel co-founder Bob Noyce. He's a legend out there. He pioneered things like awarding stock options to engineers, introducing relaxed pricing to enable free flow of ideas without fear of hierarchy, and truly brought about a culture of independence among the employees at Intel. I did a small stint in the Bay Area too, and I saw many startups modeling themselves on what was obviously a legacy from that era, but even more outlandish, like fancy office spaces, bringing dogs to work, and so on. But perhaps missing the thinking behind why it was done that way. Now, Silicon Valley culture has become a shorthand for startup culture itself. So many founders often mistake a culture for creating a Silicon Valley cool vibe. Now, what's been your experience in India?
Yeah, I came across a great article recently where a founder talked about the fact that they had been through 7 startups, had read every book about startups, had met every person they needed to meet, had followed every piece of advice and kept failing. And that person's conclusion was they were following all the lessons of everybody else and not charting the path that was relevant based on who they were and the industries that they were trying to disrupt and change. And I think that it's kind of instructive as a thought to look at that and say, if as a business overall, you're trying to change something and bring about a different approach to stuff, culture is not any different in my mind. It's the same thing. It's you are trying to be a reflection. Your business is trying to be a reflection of the things that you see broken in the world. You're seeing that the mechanism by which, let's say, the Kirana shop works, or the large grocery store works, or the current form of a mobile network works, whatever it may be, or education works, you're trying to say, okay, look, I want to do it differently. And so I don't think that blindly following Silicon Valley's culture or blindly following a culture that another company has created is the right answer. I think it is really identifying who you are and who you're not. I think, quite honestly, a big issue is oftentimes people don't reflect enough on who they're not. And if they can identify the things that they're not, I think they'll be in a much healthier place to start to focus on the things that they are and do those really well.
Sure. I think so. When you talk to Indian entrepreneurs, are they early enough in introspecting who they are? Is that something that comes across as you did mention that culture is certainly not something that comes across first in the hierarchy of things that they focus on. But even introspecting, are their business in some way reflecting what the environment is about? Do they spend some time thinking about it?
Yeah, again, maybe it's I'm getting older in life now, so introspection is becoming a more common part of life. I think that at the younger age, introspection about who you are, what you are, who your business is, what it is not necessarily front and center, and it's unfortunate. And I think that having access to content that's out there, examples of companies that are out there, helps in a big way to show the value of it. And I think, again, whether it's from a board standpoint or whether it's from a founders and their advisors and mentors and colleagues kind of encouraging that perspective of thinking, I think it will come. So the short answer to your question is no, I don't see enough of it yet. But on the plus side, we do have an array of entrepreneurs who are coming out into the market who have been there, have lived through challenges, let's say, in other environments where culture has been an issue. And it's and on the largest stage, you can see it where the Uber culture caused a big concern to everybody, and a big thought around how do we approach this. So I think that the topic of culture, the topic of people, talent management, growth is much more in the center of people's minds, because I do think that now they're hearing about it more. I wouldn't say it's hit that tipping point where it's automatically being done, but I think conversations like this and opportunities like this that bring it out will definitely help.
Sure. Okay, Hari, you heard Sandeep about his experiences with companies in the Bay Area and so on. Looks like clearly Big Basket has played it very differently, and you're not playing to a playbook like a Silicon Valley playbook, or didn't drink the Silicon Valley Kool-Aid. So why was that? How did what is your impression about how Big Basket went about doing it?
So I think let me just explain, about culture really manifests itself at three levels. The first level I would say is the artifact level, which is really about, the office get up, the way you choose to present yourself. The second level is espoused values, which is you might make a statement that we are very customer centric, we are very employee centric, but they're espoused values. The third level is about the tacit stuff, how things really get done. In my opinion, I've seen this in multiple organizations, and I'm now convinced that the first two don't mean anything, which is that having, offices, people sitting in the open without cabins does not indicate that it's transparent culture. Glass offices mean nothing. So I think, artifacts have zero relevance to culture. Culture is all about what you do every day, how you do stuff, what are the kind of behaviors that are recognized, rewarded, what are the behaviors that are discouraged. You remember the movie Chakte, right? Many of the participants here would have watched this movie as well.
Yeah.
That movie, after, in the India-England match, particularly, I think after Preeti Sabharwal, takes the ball from the center and scores the goal, even though there was this other girl who was waiting for the pass, and she didn't pass, but she managed to score the goal. But from the sidelines, the deputy coach, the plump woman, is screaming, well done, Preeti, Jio Preeti, she's screaming. But Shah Rukh Khan, the coach, is not happy. In fact, when the team comes back to the returns, he smiles at everyone, he pats everyone on the back, and she's expecting a big pat and a hug, but he doesn't even look at her. So in that one moment, he's communicated to her that, this kind of play is not acceptable. We might have won, we might have won this game, you might have scored a goal, but in the long run, this is not going to work for us. So I think he communicated that message very powerfully. So culture is really about how do you communicate these kind of messages, what is right and what is wrong, what will work, what will not work. An office space, the way you decorate your office, the kind of fountain that you may have, whether you can bring your dog to work, I'm convinced it means nothing, whether it's Silicon Valley or in Indian companies. Many Indian companies, also startups, have tried some of this cool stuff. But to my mind, this really just doesn't matter. I think it's about doing the right things every day. And therefore, by doing the right things, have people watching you, and therefore improvising, learning. People learn by watching you, by imitating you, by improvising. I think people always do this. So if the top 10, 15 people in the company are committed to doing the right things every day, invariably over a period of time, I think everyone else would begin to do that.
So Hari, could you give us an example of something like this at Big Basket? So what do these leaders try to emulate on a daily basis in some way to talk about the tacit stuff that you spoke about?
Right. So I'll just a disclaimer here, which is that no culture is right or wrong, because at the end of the day, culture is about an organizational personality. Just as every individual has a personality, culture defines an organizational personality. And at a very early stage startup, culture simply equals founders. Culture of a startup is really who the founders are. It reflects their personality almost completely. Okay. And therefore, there's nothing right or wrong. Over a period of time, you can make some slight tweaks. You can become a slightly different individual. You can become a slightly different startup, but you cannot be very different from who you are. So coming back to your very specific question of Big Basket. So for example, humility is a deeply ingrained value at Big Basket, which means that, however smart you may be, whatever education pedigree you may have, whatever your past accomplishments may be, it's very important for you to work with humility with people who've had less privileged education. So that is very important for us, and that is demonstrated every day. So arrogance is just not okay. Arrogance about your accomplishments, arrogance about who you are, that's just not okay. So that's a value that's lived every day. So if it's lived every day, people understand, that it pays off. Arrogance is not going to work. So I think that's one example of the way we, that's one value that we've been able to trust. So respect for people, humility is something that's very important for us. When it comes to, for example, we've created a policy which is, an equal opportunities workplace. And, we have a lot of women, people with disabilities working for us. And we have the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act.
Sure.
And every startup, every company would have a posh policy. But it's ultimately what you do when there's a violation, which determines, whether people believe in it and whether people live by it every day or not.
Sure.
We had some situations where there were some very senior folks who ran functions and who ran regions, which were critical for our growth. At that point of time, losing that individual, we have put our journey back. And in both these cases, we took the very tough call. In 48 hours, we had let these two individuals go. And everyone was surprised, shocked. And I think that single action made BigBasket a great place for women to work. I think across the industry, across, the talent market, the word got around. So I think word does get around. So it's about these things that you do every day. I think that's what I mean when I say that, office decor doesn't matter. You might say you're customer centric, but are you really demonstrating that every day? You're employee centric. You stand up for prevention of sexual harassment, but do you do the right things every day? That's what matters.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Hari. I'll move on to Mani. Mani, you came on board in 2015 to lead a new age function, analytics. How was BigBasket thinking about this area, and what was your leadership mandate?
Hi, Swami. So, just like Hari pointed out, even in my case, there was not necessarily a very explicit brief or a mandate, but very clearly, we were getting to a stage where Hari, working with the founders, was assembling the leadership team. So this involved hiring our head of projects, head of marketing, head of analytics, which is a role that I came on to take. Now, that was just a milestone in BigBasket's journey when it comes to sort of thinking about this area. While you said analytics is a new age function, in BigBasket, the founders typically boil this down to what analytics eventually means. What it means for any business is using data to make better decisions. And in the case of BigBasket, it becomes even more critical because it provides a competitive advantage to BigBasket versus others that are offline players who may not have access to the kind of data that an e-commerce company gets access to. So given that platform, the specific thinking was, how do we use this information to become more efficient and, more importantly, deliver a superior customer experience? So those were the key questions that were running in the minds of the founders. And I came on board to sort of do a couple of specific things, or maybe more than a couple of specific things. Number one is build an analytics ecosystem made up of internal as well as partner talent that would lay the foundation for us to leverage data. That meant, number one, sort of setting up the analytics infrastructure on the cloud platform that becomes reliable, scalable, and ingest data from necessary sources. Number two is get this data out very quickly to the different business teams, be it the marketing team, the merchandising team, etc., so that the time from data to decision gets compressed. And so whatever was needed to make that happen was the second part of the thinking. And the third part of the thinking was to make sure that we got leaders to use data, and through that spread the culture of using data to drive decision making within the organization. So these are specifically the things that I began to focus on as soon as I came on board. But credit to the founders; they've been always data-oriented folks, and there's more to it than what others would say when they use this term, data-driven culture. I'll talk about that a little later. But they clearly knew that data and leveraging data to be impactful in terms of customer experience, in terms of cost optimization, in terms of growth, could help BigBasket stand out in the market as well as leverage it as a competitive advantage. And so my role was to come in and make that happen. So that's quickly what I set out to do when I came on board.
Okay. So I have a follow-on question for you, Mani. So, you talked about the four phases of growth in your book. I know when Big Basket was no revenue to 50 million and so on, till growing to about $1 billion in revenue. And the analytics function playing a very strong role in making that transition happen. So, very quickly, what are the two challenges you faced in sustaining this data-driven culture?
Yeah.
You did say that
So,
your founders were very supportive, but how do you sustain it, and how do you make it all permeating in the organization?
very important question, and I want to use this opportunity to go into a greater level of detail when it comes to talking about the data-driven culture. It's a very abused term. Pretty much everyone says they are now data-driven, but it's important to understand what that means. There is data, and many have written about it. When you take the data and sort of extract information out of it, it becomes more meaningful. You take the information and translate it to insight, it becomes even more powerful. And eventually, what you do with that insight is what defines the culture of the organization when it comes to data. So in our case, data-driven culture, was something that we clearly drove top-down because, like Hari said, culture is what you live and breathe every day, and particularly when the leaders do it, then others understand it and adopt it as a way of life. So in our case, we want to make sure that the business heads of various functions, as well as regional leaders, begin to use data to make decisions. Now it comes with a set of challenges. Number one is something that I clearly heard the chief algorithms officer of Stitch Fix. Stitch Fix is a US-based startup that sort of does bespoke dresses for customers and leverages data and, more importantly, algorithms to drive a superior customer experience. And in one of the podcasts, the chief algorithms officer makes a very effective point about how in the very early days of human life on this planet, humans were forced to make decisions very instinctively using gut a lot more than data. You are standing outside a cave when you are facing a lion. That's not the time to quickly crunch an algorithm to figure out the speed at which you should run. You quickly have to make a decision on whether it's flight or fight, and therefore humans tended to use a lot of gut and instinct to make decisions. Fortunately or unfortunately, over the many years, as humans have evolved, we've become very used to continuing to rely on that instinct, on that gut feel to make decisions, even though a lot more data is available to us to make more informed decisions. For example, when it comes to personal and professional lives, on the personal life in terms of planning your health, planning your finances, planning your education, planning your bringing of kids, when data is available, we still tend to lean on instinct and gut-based decision making, when data-driven decision making could, deliver better results. Similarly, on the professional front as well, we continue to rely on gut instinct, and so the biggest challenge, is in building that culture of leveraging data. Now, this is not to say that there's no room for instinct or gut-based decision, because data also can only push you to a certain end or to a certain degree. So if you are left with, with data having brought you to a point where you're left with two choices, each of which is equally good in terms of the outcome, then that's where you probably bring in your past experience, your instinct, your gut to probably make a better decision. But it's important that you use data to get to that point and not rely on instinct all the way through, right? And so the biggest challenge was sort of building that culture within the organization, getting everyone to build a hypothesis-based approach to decision making. Specific examples are when we want to improve our ABVs. ABV is an important metric that we look at, which stands for average basket value. This essentially is, measuring how much do our customers buy per order. It's an important metric that drives our unit economics. There are things that you could quickly do, which could be short term in boosting your, ABV. Some of which could be just setting up incentives for customers to buy at higher order value. But how do you make this sustainable? What does data tell you? Looking at some of this data, we got some very, very powerful insights. one of the insights that we took away from that was the fact that the ABVs on our desktop, customers that use the desktop to place a big basket order are much higher than the ABVs of customers that use the app to place an order. And digging deeper helped us understand that when customers sit down to place an order on desktop, they are more planned. They have more access to the real estate on the app, on the desktop, that helps them identify products that they otherwise would have missed when placing their order. Versus on the app, given that it's a small screen, very small real estate, and by design, app is not focused on engagement, but are more focused on getting the task done. Customers may not have access to all of these additional tools that they have on the desktop. So we then began to set out to recognize what are those additional tools that we could build on the app that could help customers get the same experience or a experience similar to what they would get on the desktop, and through that organically build the ABV in a sustainable long-term manner, right? And so this truly came from a very data-driven culture by leveraging data to draw insights and convert them to actions. So that was one of the challenges. The second challenge is something which is Hari's favorite, and I constantly watch out for that. In a data-driven culture, it is also quite likely that you could get caught in the analysis paralysis mode. It might begin to look like the smallest piece of data that you have, how much a number moved up or down, or how much a metric moved up or down, could seem to have meaning beyond what it really means to the business. And so the second challenge is in fact being able to step back every now and then and looking at what is the real question that we should be answering here, and not getting caught in some of these elements that appear to be data, that appear to be nuggets of wisdom, nuggets of information, nuggets of insight, but may not necessarily solve the real long-term problems, right? And so that's the second part of the challenge, not getting too data-driven to the point where you're not focusing on the big picture.
Fantastic. Okay. We've got a couple of questions before we move to the next segment. We've got one from Sunil Malhotra. And to the point that you were just making, Hari, it says that Big Basket, he says that Big Basket has Hari said that Big Basket has an obsessive customer focus. My own web experience suggests that it isn't all there. What were some of the challenges along the way? If you could just summarize one or two, in this transition to make the customer experience paramount. Either you or Hari could take this question. But if you could just keep it to a couple of challenges that you faced.
So I think the way we build the business itself, that's the starting point. So for example, when we asked ourselves the question, why does somebody shop with Big Basket? We figured out that they wanted to avoid a visit to the store. And therefore, if they wanted to avoid a visit to the store, what do we need to do? We need to provide them everything that a store would provide, a large modern retail store, supermarket would provide. So for instance, we said that our assortment should be very wide, very broad assortment, very wide range of assortment. We should be able to provide fruits and vegetables, which is a very wicked supply chain to crack. And we need to provide chilled and frozen items like ice creams. So no online retailer has ever attempted to provide fruits and vegetables and chilled and frozen, because the supply chain is really wicked. And this is a supply chain that we have cracked, and it hasn't been a difficult, it hasn't been an easy journey at all. We've gone through multiple rounds of iteration. We've reconfigured the distribution centers, the place where we, stored the fruits and vegetables, looked at air cooling options, at air conditioning options. We've looked at air conditioning of the vans that transported the stuff, the vegetables and fruits to the customer doorstep.
Yeah.
We've gotten chiller boxes, and getting in these chiller boxes with coolant refrigerant packs wasn't easy, because we supplied products which needed to be held at minus 25 degrees centigrade, products at minus 15, plus 5, minus 5, a wide range of temperatures. So we had to get chiller packs, which are solvents which froze at these temperatures to be used in the chiller boxes. So we had to do a lot of experiments. Our innovation team went into the basics of thermal engineering to figure out, what should be the insulation material, what should be the thickness, how many, of these chiller packs must we be using. And finally, we also realized on the ground, whatever we may do, a delivery boy, for the sake of convenience, might just simply not follow process, may take, one small, packet of spinach and move it to a different chiller box, and therefore not carry two chiller boxes, and avoid carrying the two chiller boxes by moving all the stuff into one later on. So then we put in, IoT devices which track the temperature right from the, dark store right up to the customer doorstep. And we're able to figure out where are the process flaws. So I would say that we've made a long way. The very fact that we've said that we have committed a time for delivery. For example, we've said that if your order is to be delivered between the 7:30 and the 10 p.m. slot, and if it's even a minute late, we'll then refund 10% of the order value to you as a customer. And 10% is a big amount because in retail we don't make those kind of margins. So there were some big calls that we took. We said we don't ask any questions. If a customer has a problem with the product is just accepted back. We take returns, no questions asked. We have a no questions asked returns policy. And it's not, it's a very, very, generous policy, which is that if you order 4 pieces of pomegranate, you consume 3 in the course of the week, and the fourth week, at the end of 6 days, you say the fourth one I'm not happy with. We don't ask questions, we take it back. So we built policies which are friendly to customers, no questions asked policy, returns policy, late deliveries commitments are there. And our customer service has been trained to be very responsive and take impromptu, spontaneous decisions about refunds and all of that. So I think we've done all the right things. Having said that, we serve more than 200,000 orders a day, including our subscription orders. And 200,000 orders a day is scale. And at this scale, I am sure that there will be some orders which will always go wrong, where there will be a few unhappy customers. But it's about what is the extent of overall satisfaction. Sure. So that's the question that I would have.
Okay. Thank you, Hari, for that. And with this, I just move on to the next segment. In this segment, we'll talk about how to build a culture roadmap. And at a broad level, there are 2 choices when shaping culture. I think we touched upon this in the first section itself, which is set up a few simple guidelines and keep the rest emergent, or work on a detailed, deliberate set of guidelines and philosophies. And I'd like to point to 2 examples here. Nordstrom, a US retailer founded in 1901, which is consistently rated as one of the best companies to work for, has their famous culture printed on a card, and that's just it. Use good judgment in all situations. Please feel free to ask your department manager, store manager, or HR for any questions at any time, and that's about it. And we know that Nordstrom is known for its legendary service. Now we can contrast it with Netflix, which produces 125-page culture document with everything spelled out. And we know Netflix is quite successful too. So Sandeep, when you look at Indian startups, what do you see often? You did mention that many of them are looking at things that are emergent, but compared to what you see in the West, how do you contrast that in the Indian context?
I actually wanted to take a step back for a second, and what Mani was talking about as well on data and how to think about things. He mentioned this example of the wind and the lion. There's a book by Annie Duke called Thinking in Bets, which talks about the fact that life is much more like poker than it is necessarily like chess, because there's a set of randomness that comes with it and things of the sort that you can't necessarily model out and project. And in it, she talks about the fact that even as people, we're conditioned, as Mani pointed out, to just react to certain things. And so putting aside data or no data, we first have to condition ourselves to be willing to stop and think about the fact that we don't have to react the same way immediately. And I think that as we think about culture as well, I think that part of that initial rush at the early stages of a startup is you're running. And so to be willing to pause for a second and say, listen, I have an opportunity to reflect. Just because the wind rustled the leaves, it could be the wind. It may not be a lion. I may not die today. And let me actually reflect for a second and explore this a little bit further. Data is one means to do it by all means and should be leveraged. But I think that the first step in all of it to me in the journey is to actually be willing to change the way in which you operate as a person and take the approach that says, hang on a second, I need to explore this, and also not chalk everything down to being the same occurrence every time. That if the wind blew this time, if the leaves moved, it was a wind this time, it will always be the wind. be willing to explore the idea that next time it could be the lion, next time it could be the wind, next time it could be something else. And so therefore, I'm coming back to your question around, is it emergent or prescriptive? I think to your point, we talked about the fact that I think most startups tend to operate in a mindset of, all right, I'm just going to run with it. But I think first what we need to get to is a point of saying, okay, let me reflect on what it is that matters. And in our business, a venture business is no different than a startup. We have a culture, we have an environment. We've listed 3 simple rules that we prescribe to ourselves as well as our companies. One is don't run out of money. 2 is don't ever stop running your business. And 3 is if you don't know, ask. And that pretty much summarizes the way we think about the world and the way we encourage our companies to kind of think about things. And it was interesting. I didn't know Nordstrom's card said ask your manager or whatever, but I do think that willingness to allow for failure and allow for questions to be asked no matter where it is on that spectrum, I think is very, very important. And so I would say that I would encourage and like to see more companies adopt some sense of things that matter, and in that then work around it. I'm not necessarily a big fan of 125-page set of documents to outline it. I do think that we need to know who we're not and what we're not going to be, and then kind of work within that.
Sure. Okay. Okay, I want to turn to Hari again here. Hari, Big Basket made some deliberate decisions upfront. It modeled itself as a grocery company with an app and not an app for grocery. Right. So when SoftBank and Tiger Global declined to fund Big Basket and actually went ahead and funded Grofers instead, because of the disagreement with this model, the founder's conviction was certainly put to test. We have heard Hari Menon talk about it a couple of times. So you stuck to your guns, and that's a huge leadership call. So can you just walk us through what was on the leaders team's mind?
So I think all of us have heard, Marshall Goldsmith say that what got you here won't get you there. I think the counter is that if you forget what got you here, you will never get anywhere. So I think you need to remember both sides of this. And the Big Basket founders in their prior life, when they ran FabMart, I think they had learned a few lessons and learned them well. And some of those lessons were that if a customer orders online and if you 20 items, for instance, and if you supply 18, that's not enough, because then you're forcing the customer to visit the store for those 2 items, and the customer could buy the remaining 18 items also from the store. So you need to have a very high fill rate, which is 100% of the items ordered, you must be able to deliver. So I think there were some lessons, and you can't deliver these kind of fill rates if you just have a very casual marketplace approach where you go to a big bazaar or to some of the other, Kirana stores or hypermarkets to pick customer orders, because you don't have access to their inventory. You have no idea when a customer places an order whether you'll be able to fulfill that completely or not. So I think the founders were very clear about this. So I think 2014-15 were years when there were, some crazy ideas about scale, and some of these large investors believed that it's important to scale very quickly. And they found that asset-light models scale quickly, and for obvious reasons. But they tend to break customer experience in the grocery space. So while it's important to scale early, while it's true that an asset-light model or a pure technology business can scale more rapidly, in a business like this, where you're serving customers, where fill rates are important, where out of stock needs to be minimal, it's important to have your own inventory, control your own inventory. I think the founders had learned their lesson well, and therefore it didn't really matter who said, because ultimately just think about it, right? What does SoftBank know about how to run a grocery business? I think you need to have that confidence that, a brand name doesn't communicate anything. Tomorrow, if a film star tells me, something about cosmology, why the hell should I care? So I think you don't have to be overawed by brand names. I think you need to have some conviction in your own experiences. And I think that's what the Big Basket founders stuck to. It's like, Galileo being told by the church, you better accept that the sun goes around the earth. But I think Galileo was pretty sure the earth goes around the sun. So the popes of the investing world may believe that an asset-light model helps, but that doesn't work, because everyone was sure that this was critical. The inventory model is critical.
Super point, Hari. Yeah, and a great example of Galileo and the Pope. Yeah, so certainly. Mani, I want to come to you. Most startups today say they are a technology company. It's actually following up from the prior question. So Big Basket is articulated as a grocery company with an app. So since you look at the domain of technology and analytics, how does this manifest itself in Big Basket?
So this this belief that we are a grocery company with an app and not necessarily a technology company that delivers grocery manifested itself as a function of design, choice, and the circumstances. Uh, Understandably, the founders are not tech wizards, and clearly they knew how to run grocery. And they began to look at e-commerce as being a fantastic opportunity to deliver groceries and bring this onto the e-commerce platform, and through that, sort of create a differentiation. And thankfully, because there was no one with a strong technology background, it just played out in a way where they began to focus on leveraging technology just from an execution perspective. But more importantly, the choice also was clearly to say that we will use technology wherever it helps us enhance the customer experience, right? And so that clearly was the choice that was also made. So by design, not having a strong technology person among the founding team, and plus the choice clearly to say that we'll use technology to deliver a superior customer experience and use it to make a difference to the customers, came together, and therefore, that's a principle that we've been living by, that we are a grocery company with an app, right? Now, how does it matter and how does it run on a daily basis at Big Basket? Number one, we make choices recognizing that we are a grocery company that uses technology. What does that mean? We don't build a product or an app which is technology heavy, which has all of the bells and whistles that modern technology can offer, and then try getting that out to the customer to get them to use it, right? We recognize that grocery purchase is a tedious activity for most customers. Even in the offline facilities, customers would like to quickly be done with it, get out of the checkout lane and get back home, because this is repetitive and a chore, to put it mildly, right? And so, having recognized that, we therefore do not create any roadblocks or any challenges because technology allows us to do that. We therefore focus on quickly getting the customers to come onto the app, find the products that they want to, quickly add them to basket, find a slot, make the payment, and move on to do other things. Therefore, what happens, which you will now begin to see, maybe most other apps begin to show, is that on the browse page or on the search page, you can right there add an item to the basket without even having to go to the product page to learn more about the product, because all said and done, potato, a year ago and potato today are the same. There's nothing, cool or earth-shaking happening on the potato market that requires the customers to dig through the product page of the potato to learn more about it, right? And so that's one. So we use technology to enhance the experience, right? The second part of it is having recognized that a lot of the purchase or a lot of the basket of our customers are repetitive, given that they are made up of food grains, masala items, oil items, fruit items, vegetable items, etc. We've used technology to build a smart basket that makes it easy for a customer to shop and complete their transaction very quickly. It recognizes what is repetitive, what is the customer's buying behavior, and uniquely personalizes the smart basket, recognizing what they are likely to have run out and make that available to them. So technology there made a difference. We quickly use that opportunity, built it out, and enhance the customer experience. And data tells us that customers that use the smart basket are able to finish their shopping faster and don't miss items. The third dimension to this is the fact that the choices that we make on the technology also are driven by this belief. Unlike others that may be buying some of the cutting edge technology suites, technology products, and deploy them to see if they make sense and use maybe 5% or 10% of all the features available, we build many of these things in-house or build to our needs. So when it comes to our data warehouse, when it comes to our clickstream solution that helps us understand user behavior, and through that understand what are bottlenecks, what are pain points for our customers when it comes to shopping experience and improving our app experience for our customers. We've not picked those products that are typically popular in the market bring them on board and try using portions of them. Instead, we built an open source based solution ground up and using 100% of it pretty much every single day. So that's how, the belief that we are a grocery company with an app reflects in the technology and analytics choices that we make day on day in running the business.
Okay.
Let me just, Swami, add to this a little bit, which is, I think, at a more foundational level, I think this is about being very upfront and honest, right? Which is that at no point of time we wanted to claim that we're a tech company because tech companies get much better valuations. We said we want retail company valuations. We're happy with retail company valuations, and because we are a retail company, Lufthansa can't behave like a tech company. It's an airline company which uses technology, just like Big Basket is a retail company that uses technology. So WeWork, for instance, pretended to be a technology company, being a being a real estate company. And we also, what happened? So we did not want any of that to happen. We wanted our valuations to progressively go up to reflect the true value of the business. And I think fundamentally, a tech company's approach is about what all problems can be solved using technology, what all businesses can be built using technology. At Big Basket, that's never the way we looked at it. We said we are in the retail business and we will use technology just to build the retail business. So that was it.
Sure. So while at that point, Hari, I just got a question from Vivek Kelkar. So he asked, beyond techniques, tools, and methods, what's missing is sometimes the behavioral aspect or getting the mindset right. Hari, can you share what did you do to get the right mindset and the behavior in Big Basket?
Yeah. So I think, coming back to a little bit of that question, I think to answer this question and go back to the previous point you made about Nordstrom versus Netflix.
Yeah.
So I think, you said there is an item in the card which says that if in doubt, ask your manager. So I think as company scales, most managers won't have an answer. So I think it's important to equip managers also to have an answer to these questions. So I think what you need is a mix, which is that you need to articulate some components of your culture. It's like a budget. The budget really doesn't mean anything. It is the entire exercise which goes towards making the budget, the kind of discussions that you need to have. That's what matters more than the ultimate outcome of the budget. And the same thing is true of culture as well. As you reflect on what you stand for, what is this company about, I think that's when you get a little clearer yourself. Because as I think Sandeep mentioned, startups are running. They just haven't had the time to think about it. So I think this is a great opportunity to think about who we are and who we are not. I think it's equally important, actually maybe even more important. So I think we got this piece right, which is we thought about who we are not. We are not a tech company, for example. And we thought about who we are. And we said, let's identify the core components of who we are. And we got those things right. And we used a simple game theory to communicate why culture is important to people. Because, just giving them that lecture, on that, it looks like the HR stuff, which is culture is good, culture is great. Everybody says that. So we just brought in simple game theory, used a 2x2, and in a way, explained that in a way very logical people could easily understand. And I think over a period of time, a large number of people have got educated. 80 to 100 people in the company, the people who matter, have clearly understood why culture directly impacts business. What is it that you need to do to drive culture? What are the key components of the company's culture? If 80 people in the company understand it, very soon everybody else begins to understand that. And I'm not claiming that, everybody in the company behaves in precisely the same way. Everybody adheres to the culture. Obviously, there will be deviants, but the point is that you get a majority of the people to understand. You get the majority of the people to align and do the right things when you are not watching. So I think that's critical. So behaviors are also gradually impacted by the kind of rewards and recognition. The Shah Rukh Khan example and the England goal that I gave you in Chak De. Some of these small gestures and these behaviors, which will drive behaviors. That lady would never have again done the same thing, because she would not have been in the team if she had repeated that behavior. So behaviors get aligned based on what managers do. A large number of managers do, what kind of reward, what kind of behaviors they reward, what kind of behaviors are penalized. And for example, in our reward and recognition.
Hello. Looks like we've lost Hari. Hari, are you there? Okay, we'll just wait for him to come back. In the meanwhile, I just want to move to a related topic, that of building culture early. as necessity for success. We've heard about this book called The Trillion Dollar Coach, and the person behind it is Bill Campbell. And he's considered to have shaped the soul of Silicon Valley. And he often coaxed founders to bring on talent to help cultures, to help culture and startups where he found the founders themselves to be lacking or unable to provide that direction. So, Sandeep, I have a question for you. As a VC, how do you assess if the founding team has the chops to set the vision and shape the culture? And what role do VCs play in this?
Yeah, so look, if you don't mind, I want to take a step back also because it'll relate to your answer to this question, but to what we were talking about earlier between what kind of a company is a company. And I think that, you know, oftentimes you get caught up in thinking about what's going on in the industry broadly. I'll give you a quick example. When we invested in Rebel Foods, which at that time was called Fasos, there were a bunch of delivery businesses that came around at the time in the food side. So you had Tiny Owl, Runner, Roadrunner, a bunch of other guys, and suddenly valuations were going through the roof. You talk to investors, they would talk to you about why isn't the frequency of your purchases more often? And you start to wonder, where are we going wrong and what are we doing? We start to realize that actually our comp set is wrong. And I think to both Hari and Mani's point earlier, you know, if you define your comp set correctly, you suddenly start to think about your metrics very differently. You suddenly start to think about also the environment that you're trying to build in a new light. And so when we look at businesses, we're very clear. Consumers already consume things. As they pointed out, they already consume groceries, they already consume jewelry, they already consume food, they already consume cars. If you're going after things that they're already consuming, then let's look at the world and the manner in which they already consume it and understand how your business is better than what they're currently doing. Where in the financial statements, the P&L, the cash flow statement, the balance sheet, is technology being applied to create an advantage in your business? And then how does that trickle out into how you measure your business moving ahead? And once you do that, and you sort of look at the universe of comps that you have out there, you start to say, look, I'm not trying to drive call whatever number of transactions a day in a certain manner. I'm trying to get to a number that is logical based on the limitations that exist for actually delivering that product. As Hari and Mani pointed out, delivering groceries is very different than the action of simply setting up a marketplace. You have infrastructure of all this. Similarly, in Rebel, we understood that making a kitchen and scaling food so that people are not getting sick when they eat the food is a very different process than simply connecting restaurants. And so understanding who your comps are and understanding who your world is, understanding how your P&L operates will help you define a little bit better how I think you need to think about the pace at which you grow, the environment you want to create, the people you want to bring in, the things that you're going to talk about that matter. Now, coming to the question of how do you assess founders on this and how do you assess the world, honestly, it's a very slow process. It's not one where I think you ever are quite done with that assessment. Our investment process is long. We're not the fastest. We're not priding ourselves on making the most number of investments. So we take a fair amount of time to get to know people. And in getting to know them, you actually observe how they deal with adversity. We have a question on our submission form for new deals where we ask, what does success mean to someone? I'm actually in the process of changing that to describe a failure you went through. And the logic is, I think you learn a lot more from how a person handles that feedback, how the person handles any situation where things haven't gone as expected, even as they projected to you, which is largely, again, if I go back and look at all the companies we funded, not a single company has met the numbers they originally outlined, which is fine. It wasn't expected. But now we worked with them closely enough to understand how are they going to deal with it. So in looking at entrepreneurs in regards to they have the chops to build the culture, you're really looking at, do they have the ability to handle variability as life progresses? They have the ability to sell a story, to convince you. Can they bring me along for their vision? So much of life, again, Yuval Harari and Sapiens talks about the fact that the only thing that differentiates us as humans from animals is our ability to create subjective entities. And these subjective entities are ranging from companies to churches to money. I mean, if you gave a monkey a $2 bill and said, or a banana, they're going to take the banana instead of the $2 bill. And we place value in that $2 bill, so therefore we look at it differently. So, but it's in our storytelling that creates those subjective entities. So how good is an entrepreneur, is a founder at weaving those stories, getting people along for the ride? And you look at Amazon, I was in the Valley back in the late 90s, it was a bookstore. And it was a bookstore and it was known as a bookstore, and that was the idea. But if you met any of the analysts that covered the company at that time, they would say, you have no idea what's coming. because the way Jeff Bezos could tell a story about what was going to come was second to none. And therefore, can you do that while you're figuring it out? Because it's a lot of the startup journey is a bit of kicking the can down the road to hope that you're going to figure out the answer a little bit further down. So can you take people along that journey? Can you articulate a view that gets people to buy into it? And can you live by it? And can you handle the negative situations with grace and elegance to be able to step back, get that perspective, and then decide on how you're going to move ahead? I think that is stuff that we try to search for. We try to observe a lack of immediate reactiveness to things, an ability to reflect. All of these are important. So I do think that if we sat down and distilled it to a handful of characteristics, we could probably come up with a few that actually that are there. But the reality is, unfortunately, just like we say, the startup world at the start is very instinctual and based on gut. A fair amount of this is also instinctual and based on gut on how you felt that relationship is developing.
Super. Thanks for that, Sandeep. I want to move on to the next segment now, where we will talk about the toolkit for shaping culture itself. So we heard that the focus of startups in the initial days is all about survival, but we also heard somewhere that its soul needs to be nurtured. So in my discussion with several startup CEOs, two things: one, talent management, and two, communication, which we heard Hari speak as well, come up repeatedly as the fuel for that culture. So I think we've got Hari back. So I want to go back to Hari here. Hari, in the book, you narrate the experiences of hiring leadership talent, especially in new age skills. So walk us through what goes on in your mind when you're getting on board a leader at Big Basket.
So I think, one of the biggest make or break for a startup that is scaling rapidly is an ability to assimilate lateral hires. Because, some of these young bunch of people who were there at the early stage hustled to get the startup off the ground, worked very closely with the founders, built the reputation, suddenly begin to wonder why we can't take it to the next level. Why do we need to bring in these laterals? And I've seen, startups which have been able to assimilate laterals well and startups which fail to assimilate laterals well. So I have, a 2x2 to explain, what kind of startups are able to assimilate laterals well and what kind of startups struggle to assimilate laterals well. So at Big Basket, I think that's been obviously the question that is always there, which is when you hire a lateral, when you brought in money, for example, will we be able to assimilate money? Will money be able to earn the respect of those who have brought Big Basket to where it is? Will money be able to inspire them? And will they be able to see value in what money is bringing to the table? I think that's a very crucial question. And I think there are a lot of components to this, which is the organization has a role to play in this. The founders have a role to play. And the lateral hire himself or herself has a role to play. So for instance, the lateral hire must start with the basic belief that, these guys have brought this company to where it is. They couldn't have done it without being smart. So I need to start with the assumption that these guys are smart. I need to be able to learn from them. I think that should be the starting point. And people who come in as laterals at a later point of time during the scale journey, sometimes, have come from large organization setups. I think having worked in large organization setups, sometimes you can lose a sense of agility. So I think it's important for them to retain that sense of agility, a sense of urgency, energy levels, in terms of communication, in terms of doing things, ability to hustle. They must continue to demonstrate those values that the younger lot or the previous set of employees valued a lot. In addition, I think they need to bring in the competence for which they've been hired. They need to be able to build for scale. They need to be able to think about the function very differently. So Mani thought about analytics very differently from what his predecessors thought about it. So I think that's very important as well. And the founders need to be able to balance this well. The founders play a very important role in this assimilation process. If they get impatient with the lateral hires a tad too quickly and begin to listen to, what the earlier set of people are saying about them, then I think they're doing the wrong thing, because the earlier set of people in some ways, till they begin to respect those lateral hires, are in some ways waiting for them to fail so that they could say, we told you so. So I think it's important for the founders to be able to give some time to those lateral hires tell the people who were there internally, the rock stars who were there earlier, that hang on, wait for some time. These are the values that we expect them to bring, and encourage the two groups to work together. I think that's a very important component as well. So I think as we bring lateral hires, as we brought lateral hires into Big Basket, the most important, topmost priority for me was to keep a vigil, for the first 30 to 60 days to ensure that assimilation process is going well. So I think that's the way I've looked about lateral hiring.
Great. So I have a very quick follow-on question. And, when you're looking for culture fit, right, it may lead to looking for talent in the same mold as, typically that of founders, because the founders have set a lot of the direction and all of that. So how do you walk the fine line between looking for conformity to the culture and, to some of the models that you have within, to diversity, which is looking for talent with, diverse perspectives?
Right. So that's a very interesting question, because you can't create clones of existing folks, right? All the laterals cannot be clones. At the same time, I think one thing is important, which is that there are certain core components of your culture on which there is no compromise. But you should be open to bringing in people who can question the status quo, who can bring in some new perspectives and work with the existing set of folks to make some change or drive some change. I think that diversity in thought process is very critical. I think there is always this debate, at least a tacit debate about homogeneity versus diversity. I think homogeneity helps you to get off the ground quickly in an early stage, helps you get quick alignment, helps you to run ahead fast. But I think over a period of time, as you scale, absence of diversity begins to hurt you badly. I think you can get very badly, blindsided. You will not be able to recognize a few things. You will not be able to spot problems early on because all of you think alike. And I think it's important to bring diversity in thought process, more than diversity in gender, because I think it's important to bring diversity in thought process. And if you bring in diversity in thought process over a period of, gender diversity automatically happens. But if you focus on gender diversity, then you indulge in what I would say is tokenism, and you have diversity on the paper. You hire women but make men out of them. So I think it's important to get in diversity, and therefore some degree of people who are and getting people with some differences, people who are slightly different on some dimensions, people who can bring different perspectives and help take this organization to a different trajectory.
Sure. Thanks for that perspective, Hari. Sandeep, I want to come to you. So, in the context of talent and recruiting talent from outside and building the team, how should founding teams think about it, and what do you advise them?
I think there's a saying that you filter for aptitude and hire for attitude. And I think that kind of fits well for how we think about things. I think it's important to know that people can do the skill, but really the question is, what attitude are you looking for, and how do they buy into where we're going? Now, that doesn't mean it needs to be homogenous in the thought process of how we're doing things. I mean, I think I'll give you an example at Lightbox as well. Early on, we hired someone from a brand background, brand strategist, with the thought process that let's have a very different view. We're generally, let's say, more numbers oriented, perhaps product driven, but we realized the importance of brand in the businesses that we're building, and wanted to make sure that we had that voice at the table. And I think that whether that applies to us or whether that applies to a company as well, you have to be clear about the voices that are going to be required to help you ensure that you're thinking about the business correctly. Now, it's not always an easy journey for the diverse person in an organization, because the diverse person is bringing perhaps an outside view or a different perspective from what everyone has bought into. And ensuring that you cultivate and encourage that is on the existing team to make sure that they are willing to encourage that to come in, and willing to let that person have some space to communicate, whether that's in a delivery business, a logistics business, a jewelry business, a car business, whatever you need to enable and empower people with a diverse view. So it's not enough to say, yeah, we want it. You really be careful about saying that you're ready to give that person some success in experimenting in certain directions. Because I think we have to remember that every startup came out of a group of people ready to take a risk to change an industry and look at things a bit differently. And I think that to continue that means to bring in diverse views and be willing to accept that those views need to be given a chance. So again, embracing the idea that failure is viable, possible, perhaps even essential to continue to succeed. I think that I would say that, look, I completely agree with Hari's point that it's faster at the start to let that homogeneity exist. And by the way, that's also why as investors, we tend to prefer small boards. We tend to prefer to be the sole early investors because, look, there's a lot of debate and nobody has the answer. You don't want to get stuck, and Money mentioned earlier, this paralysis analysis or analysis paralysis game. You don't want to get stuck in that at any point. And so if you can ensure that we're progressing at the beginning and then yet keep bringing in the willingness to do that. And you go too far down the path of having homogeneity in the business, it becomes very hard to break out. And so it's one of those balancing acts that needs to continue to play out. But I think that, like most things in life, if you have awareness, it's the starting point. And with that, you can then build.
Sure. Thank you, Sandeep. Mani, I'll come to you now. In the book, you talked about how a pair of shoes are kept in the meeting room to represent the customer. So how do you nurture customer empathy across your diverse talent pool? So you have people in delivery, you have people in customer service, you have people in technology. So how do you nurture this customer empathy across the organization?
It comes in many ways. One is, like Hari said earlier, it's driven top down. So whenever our leaders visit any of these locations, they make it a point to interact with the various team members, including our delivery folks, our customer service teams, and in some of these cases, and I entirely refer to this as the 4 moments of truth when it comes to Big Basket and its customers. Number one is moment of truth is when they come to the app to order, and it has to be a very smooth experience for them, and we work very, very hard to make that happen. Therefore, the customer empathy comes into play there to make sure that it's a just as if we were the customer, and many of us are internal Big Basket employees themselves are customers. So we keep that in mind and think of how we design the app and how do we make that work. The second moment of truth is essentially when the customer sort of gets the product delivered, and that's one of those rare moments when even when we are an e-commerce company, our customers get to see the human face of the organization. This is when who we call as CEEs, customer experience executives. They are the face of Big Basket that the customers get to meet, and we make sure that even at that moment of truth, the customer experience executive brings in customer empathy. This gets articulated to them in that very, very clearly and gets manifested in various ways. A few examples are, the customer experience executive is trained to make sure they never call the customer directly. Customers find it annoying. They always go through the customer service if they need to reach the customer to find out where they are, and if they are present at home to deliver and so on, because the customer service team is trained to speak to customers in a professional manner, and therefore they are always encouraged to do that by using the customer service team. The second thing is never to ring the bell to the extent possible, knock on the door, wait for the customer to open and greet them, and request their permission to enter the house and open the cart or the crate and put the items down on the floor, right? And so they're trained to do that, and we rely on a very process-based approach, guidance from senior mentors, and in doing all of this, help them recognize why they need to do this, because that's what a customer would want us to do. And the third thing that the CE does also, again, very clearly is when they leave the customer's premises, given that they open the crate and put out the items, to clear out all of the dust or other items that may have spilled over because they opened the crate in front of the customers, right? And leave the place in the same manner in which they found it when they entered the place. In all of these, given that this is an important moment of truth for our customers, we make sure that the CEs bring in that customer perspective. The third moment of truth is when they actually use our products, and we work very, very hard to make sure that they are high quality products that the customers get and are able to use it to get the benefit of the product, right? Then the fourth moment of truth is our customer service team, which is when our customers call if they need to get some assistance to get a query answered. Again, the customer service team is trained to keep the customer in mind, where they put themselves in their shoes when answering the questions. They're empowered in many of these cases to take whatever action needs to be taken to address the customer concern. It could be a cancellation charge that had to be waived off because customer had to cancel the order due to things out of their control, and the CS team has the power to quickly make a decision and do what is right for the customer. So in all these moments of truth, we help the different business team members understand that doing what is right for the customer is always the best thing to do. And this gets driven by leaders who meet with these teams regularly and through process that have been set up to ensure that the teams recognize these and put this to practice in every single moment of interaction with the customers. The second element to this is also how do you sort of balance data when you have to make decisions. And again, there are great examples of how we've done this in the past. There are cases where very clearly we knew that even though this may impact Big Basket's revenues or whatever the case may be, we had to do the right thing and keep the customer in mind and execute the right actions. Two examples. One where we did this because it was right by the customer. We've called this out in the book as well. We noticed that by policy, Big Basket allows customers to return their products well after the product gets delivered. All you have to do is, it's a no questions asked return policy. So you call the customer service team, tell them you didn't like the product, and you would come back and pick it up and go away and refund the money to your wallet or your account. Now, we began to notice that a very small proportion of customers were probably making use of this policy in ways in which we didn't expect them to. Now, the question was, should we take off this policy? But very clearly, the leaders recognize the data also helped there. It showed that it was a very, very small portion of customers. We quickly realized that why take away an important element that worked very well for our customers, because a very small percentage of customers were not using it in the manner in which we designed it to be used. So we made the call to leave the policy as is so that customers continue to benefit from it, right? The second case was, another situation where it worked the opposite way. We started off as van-based delivery model, and we then began to include express delivery facility. And we began to realize over a period of time that customers built baskets, and some of those items were available very quickly within 2 hours for delivery, and the rest of them would come later. And we began to notice that because this was available, the customers split the orders. So even though the order could be all delivered together at a later slot, because some items were available early on, customers sort of split the orders. Now, it worked very well for the customers, but we also began to realize that the average basket value was falling. It had impact on the unit economics. And we quickly realized that the right thing to do was to communicate this to the customers and help set up policies that allowed the customers to split and pay a fee when they decide to do so, while encouraging the customers to the great extent to get the orders shipped together if there was no pressing need for them to split the order. In fact, it worked very well, and customers, took to the change without too many questions, and they began to, in fact, some of the cases, tell us very clearly that they were really surprised that they were allowing them to break the orders when it really was not necessary for them to break the orders, right? And so, in this case, the data told us the right thing to do in the long term was to sort of create policies that would encourage customers to not split the orders, and it worked very, very well. And that's how we sort of balance between data and customer empathy and get teams to think from a customer's.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. I have a question here from Raju. And his question is, how often should one revisit culture purpose so that it stays fresh, relevant, and reignites the passion in the people working towards demonstrating it? Hari, do you want to take this?
Yeah. So my own sense on this is that as long as the founders are active, I don't think it's really necessary to revisit it in a big way. So I think it's important for companies like, let's say, Uber, where there has been a huge management transition. Companies like public companies, let's say like IBM, where the founders no longer exist and a bunch of professionals have run this company for decades. I think it's important for those companies from time to time re-examine what the company stands for. And in those companies, a bottoms-up approach may be more relevant, where get opinions from a large number of people, distill that into a set of culture components, values. But I think for startups, as long as the founders are still active, I don't think it's really required to revisit.
Okay. Okay, excellent. I just had one quick question for Mani here. Mani, in the book you wrote about a couple of acquisitions that Big Basket made. You talked about Deliver, a hyperlocal company, and also Quick24. Could you just very quickly tell us when you're making these acquisitions, which are typically part of a startup journey, how do you look at culture fit when you acquire these companies? Either of you could take it, Mani or Hari.
I'm going to quickly share my comments and then let Hari talk about it, because he was deep in discussions and understands this better and can articulate this better. But in some sense, it goes back to what Sandeep said earlier, sort of filter for aptitude, then hire for attitude, right? And so, we do the same thing here. We look at potential sort of businesses that fit with our sort of business plans for the long term. So that helps us prepare a shortlist. That's very, very logically done, keeping business goals in mind. And then who we then acquire comes from making sure that there is a great attitude fit, culture fit between the companies, and that the founders of those companies, when they come on board, continue to feel that they are still founders, but within a larger organization, have the freedom to run the businesses with all the necessary support. And so, very, very similar approach, filter based on business needs and then acquire based on cultural fit, right? That's quickly my answer to that question, but Hari is best placed to share more details.
No, I don't have anything much, Mani. I think it's very clear, your responses.
Okay. Excellent. I think we are running out of time, and just we have time for one more question. If there's anything that comes our way, we will take it. I guess there are a few in the chat, but while we try to address the question that might come, I just want to remind all of us here that we are designing an immersion for Founding Fuel's masterclass community on how Big Basket thinks and works. You will get an opportunity to visit their operations and engage with the leadership team. We are restricting the number of seats to about 20. We are still working out the details, and we will share the details of the immersion and the application process, etc., in the next few days. So you need to look out for a mailer on this. Also check out the Slack community, which many of you have joined. We are completely out of time, and it was really, really an illuminating discussion from Hari, Sandeep, and Mani. Thank you very much for making the time today. So I just, the Founding Fuel team has made some quick observations, which I've also noted down here, and I just wanted to, summarize this. So we understood that define who you are and also who you are not. That is perhaps one of the important things to get the culture going. And we heard from Mani saying that data-driven culture is a much abused term, and you could just end up caught in analysis paralysis. So we got to hit a balance between trusting the data as well as the people. And you occasionally need to step back and try and see what we're trying to solve. Trust the founder's judgment in building the culture, and you can't create clones of the founding team as well. So you need diversity in thought. So I like the phrase that both Sandeep and Mani used, which is filter for aptitude and hire for attitude. So I think these were really, really interesting observations. So thank you very much for your time, and thanks to all of you for joining the masterclass.